You want the stool or the chair?
I'm comfortable here.
All right. Go right ahead.
Okay, well, I'm not sure what I should say. My first book was Maddie, down. Lie down. My first book was a complete accident. I was writing it before I knew I was writing it. I was writing sections after classes and thinking maybe I'd write a couple of essays for the Ecological Bulletin or something until I looked at what I was doing one day and had this feeling like someone poured a bucket of ice water over my head when I realized I wasn't just writing a few essays, I was writing a book, and I should just shut up and get on with it, because I don't know how to write books. It's not what I'd ever done. As an academic, we write papers, so we're short story authors, not long story authors. That book was successful enough that I started a blog and started writing up pieces, some about writing, some just about being an academic. And at some point, well, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, actually, I realized that I had about a third of a book's worth of chapters up on the blog that a few people might occasionally read, but not that much exposure. And so I thought, wait, I could take what I've done about being an academic and expand it up into a book, and then maybe somebody would actually read it, and maybe would see it, and I would have wider exposure. So I did that. I sat down and started writing more chapters about various aspects of being an academic, and really thinking about the human systems that govern what we do and who we are as academics, that it's not just our scholarship or even our teaching, but very much our lives as scholars are governed by the systems that surround us. And so the book takes a focus very much on those kinds of human systems. And as with my first book, I tried to keep it fairly short so people might actually read it, and tried to make it readable and engaging so people might actually read it. And I thought that I might read just a couple of short sections from it and then take some time for questions and Q&A and see what people have to say or what you want to know. So the introduction starts with a couple of quotes. The first one from Maggie Rogers that says, "It's interesting, I never had any doubts about the music, but the reality of the music industry is something I had to learn." And that quote really spoke to me, because in academia it's very much the same. We get into academia because we're interested in the scholarship and the science and the topics we study. But in fact, most of what we do is not actually doing that work. Most of what we do is working on classes and working in departments and the like. And then Venus Williams had a quote about tennis. When you start playing tennis, you don't imagine there's a whole bureaucracy behind the tournaments and all that. You just think about winning the cups. And that definitely spoke to me about the way I felt when I was a graduate student, when all that really existed for me was my major professor. And there wasn't a whole lot else. Mary was the world and my life. And still is to a fairly large degree. We're still good friends, which is a nice thing. But anyhow, one of my early PhD students flowed through graduate school easily and painlessly. The vast hours and intellectual challenges associated with being a student didn't faze him. It was a little infuriating. This is supposed to be hard, damn it. But then he got a job as an assistant professor, and I finally saw some stress crinkling his eyes. The science was manageable, but combined with writing proposals, teaching classes, mentoring students, and committee work, well, that he noticed. This job is hard, but it isn't the core scholarship, the music, that makes it so. It's the music business that makes it hard. The complex mix of different activities that we have to juggle and that we have to figure out how to juggle. I had already started thinking about this book when I heard the Maggie Rogers NPR interview on National Public Radio when I was driving to work. Her comments summed up much of what I had been thinking. I got trained in graduate school to do the science, but not to deal with the science industry. We don't get trained to be an academic. This is something that has periodically perplexed me. When I was in my first year of graduate school, Mary Firestone, my PhD advisor, said she wanted to spend half her time in the lab. She was still an assistant professor, yet already didn't do her own hands-on research in the lab, though she helped with fieldwork. Thank you, Mary. That seemed odd to me. Mary's PhD involved some of the most amazing experiments that have still ever been done in our field. She used nitrogen-13 as a tracer to analyze the pathways of microbial nitrogen metabolism in soil. But nitrogen-13 is the radioactive isotope of nitrogen. It has a 10-minute half-life. You create it in a cyclotron, and then you have less than an hour to finish the experiment before all the N13 decays to carbon-13. It was awesome work. Those papers are why I applied to work with her. But then I saw this brilliant experimentalist who was no longer doing experiments. I didn't really understand. It took me time to realize the truth of Maggie Rogers' distinction between science and the science industry. Over time, I came to realize that as an academic, in particular as a professor in a research university, the job is not just to do more of the research that gets us here, but to move to the next level, to make research happen and to produce the next generation of scholars, teaching them to become awesome researchers and teachers in their own rights. Being an academic is more than just producing scholarship and teaching classes. Yet most of us have to learn the science business on our own by trial and error. This is true across all areas of scholarship and academe. Being an academic is different than just being a scholar. We may have gotten into academia because we were fascinated by molecules, mealybugs, math, movies, Marxism, or macroeconomics. But in reality, most of what we do is work with people. That becomes increasingly true as we move beyond graduate school to become professionals. I don't even know how to use most of the equipment in my lab anymore. I rely on Jacob for that. But we rarely get trained in the people skills required to function in a human institution. This is analogous to the famous maxim about military matters. Amateurs talk about tactics. Professionals study logistics. In academia, we see something similar. We read great papers, but we rarely think about the systems that trained those scholars, that allowed the work to get done or to get written and published. Yet once we move past graduate school, we come face to face with all those systems. They are fundamental to being an academic, whether you study soil biology or English literature. I know a few books that talk about being a scientist or about being an academic, rather than about how to do research, write papers, or teach classes. Ultimately, however, to be successful, productive, and happy as an academic means more than just doing clever studies, writing eloquent papers and books, or even teaching great classes. It means succeeding in the professional arena that is defined by human and institutional structures. Our departments, our universities, our societies, and our professional communities. Succeeding and thriving as an academic calls for wider, non-academic insight and skills and to how these operate and how to operate effectively with and within them. And here's a section from what I think is my favorite chapter on working with the staff. It starts with the little quote of, "Take care of the people who take care of you." As faculty, we recognize that we carry the mission of the university. We lead the research and we teach the classes. Ultimately, the entire university is about us. Everyone else in the system, from the president and provost in their corner offices to the painters and plumbers in the maintenance shop, exists to enable us to do our jobs. As academics, therefore, we're like fighter pilots. The success of the entire operation ultimately comes down to our ability to perform. We've been carefully selected and trained through years of the most rigorous and intellectually grueling training our institutions can develop. We're the best of the best, top gun, or maybe top pen. Is it any surprise, therefore, that some faculty also develop the arrogance that's the stereotype of the fighter jock? But every fighter pilot knows when they climb into the cockpit that they aren't going anywhere unless their maintenance crew has first fixed, fueled, and armed their jet. They know if their ground crew is careless, they could end up a greasy smear and a smoking, flaming hole in the ground. For a pilot, there may be no more important people in the world than their ground crew. The mission's success may ultimately rest with the pilot's ability to deliver, but it takes a team to put them in the right place with the right tools. As academics, we're no different, although it's only our careers and not our actual lives that are on the line. We may carry the mission of the university, but we won't carry it very far without our team behind us. I don't prepare my paycheck, I don't maintain my students' records, I don't hit the button to submit a research proposal, and I don't fix the plumbing in my lab when it breaks. I rely on others to do those things, and I rely on skilled administrators to organize the whole, making sure the right people are doing the right things in the right places at the right times. Without the administration and operating staff, I'd be sitting in an empty field pontificating like Plato. But I'm not sitting in a field pontificating like Plato. I'm sitting in my office in a building on a campus with more than 23,000 students and $180 million a year in research. The University of California, Santa Barbara has about 1,000 faculty members, but to enable us to do our jobs, it has over 3,500 administrative and staff employees. Yet even with that number, we are understaffed. Great staff is part of what makes a great university. Rely on knowledgeable and skilled professionals, and as systems grow more complex, that need increases. Together, faculty and staff form a single team. We have different responsibilities, but we make shared contributions. When the staff are good, I can focus on my job. Yet, they work in an environment where all too often the motto might be, perfection is invisible. Anything less, complainable. No one appreciates that. Understanding your staff is key to working effectively and to focusing on your job. They are our team members, our colleagues, and we hope our friends. Although faculty and staff together make a team, we play different roles and we come to our jobs differently. Our staff aren't us. If someone asks me who or what I am, I'll almost certainly say I'm a soil ecologist or I'm a professor. Being a professor isn't just my job, it's my identity. I am a professor. Although many staff members are as dedicated to the university and to our mission as I am, I suspect few would self-identify based on their job title. For most staff, their jobs are what they do, not who they are. Staff members don't work for us individually. They aren't my staff. They work for the department or for the university. In my department, I'm only one of 30 plus faculty who need support. My needs may be important, but no more so than others in the department. I can't expect that my grants coordinator will be able to drop everything to help me out. Someone else may have a proposal that needs to go out this afternoon. And of course, staff members' workday, unlike ours, officially ends at 5 p.m., though of course it often doesn't. Lastly, keep in mind as well that many of the people who work in our institutions do so because they need a job. Hence, the spread of skills, drive, and ability can be wide. Our best staff are awesome, but not all are that good, and a few aren't very good at all. Some problems arise because a staffer is new and still learning their job. A good supervisor will catch most of those errors, but some people continue to make mistakes, either because they are poorly trained or are in a job they are not suited to. This reflects a failure on their supervisor's part. Being in a well-run department where staff operations are efficient, competent, and supportive makes a huge difference. You get to focus on your job and to rely on your staff to support you in doing so. Not every place, however, runs smoothly. Some programs' paperwork is almost certain to be a mess. I've been at UCSB for over 25 years, and during that time I figured out how to do many of the things I need to do, which largely consists of figuring out the appropriate paperwork, how to assign grades, order research supplies, arrange travel, and so on, and add to that getting reimbursed for visitors, which I haven't figured out yet. Yet I still regularly run into things I don't know how to do, like get reimbursed for visitors. Sometimes that's because I haven't had to do it, sometimes because systems have changed, and sometimes because I just forgot. It doesn't matter, since the answer is always the same, as noted by Stephen Hurd in The Scientist's Guide to Writing, which is the second best book on science writing I know. It's a very good book, actually. but like I said, I think it's the second best. Find somebody to ask, or perhaps I can riff off his comment and adapt Jefferson Airplane. Don't you want someone to ask? Don't you need somebody to ask? Wouldn't you love somebody to ask? You better find somebody to ask. And if I could sing, I'd have sung that, but I'd do better if I don't. But who is that somebody? Universities may all do the same things, but each has evolved its own path over decades or even centuries. Each has its own unique ways of doing things. Even within the University of California, each campus does things differently. Knowing how UC works could lead you astray at a different campus. So principle number one is find someone to ask. Well, I'll stop reading there. I don't know if anyone has any questions or thoughts or comments. The book goes on in that vein, talking about the human systems that really do govern how we function within an institution, and provides what I hope is useful advice for people who are starting out in their careers. So it starts out with a chapter about being a postdoc and how to stop being a postdoc, entitled "A Postdoc's Job is to Get a Job." There's a chapter about being assistant professor with the little logo there of "No" is not spelled with a K. Chapters about getting tenure and about why associate professors are actually the least happy academics in the academic hierarchy. You'd think that having just made tenure would tend to make people very ecstatically happy, and it does for a couple of days. But then when people actually have done surveys across the entire university, associate professors are less happy than either assistants or full professors. There's a chapter entitled, and this is the one that was hardest for me to write, "Thriving in Academe When You Are Not a Heterosexual White Man." And since I actually am those things, you can imagine that I was writing about territory that was alien to me. I relied very heavily on some friends and colleagues to provide me with some useful information. I thought it was necessary to talk about, even though I didn't have any firsthand experience. There's a chapter for non-tenure track teaching faculty, which is, of course, actually the bulk of university faculty are not tenure track, whose head quote is, "It's not for the faint of heart." And for that, I got a lot of help from Dr. Helene Gardner, who used to be a teaching professor in the environmental studies program. She wrote this long thing that I was able to abstract some pieces from and to copy others. Then there's a section about university administrative systems and about working with the support staff. And then there's a section about teaching and mentoring. So 2 chapters about mentoring and mentoring graduate students and being a role model and dealing with students who are struggling. Since almost all students struggle at some point in their academic careers, some more than others, and some just don't make it. And I've had at least one graduate student who I knew from the day before she started that she was never really going to make it. And how do you deal with a student like that when you've accepted them, they're yours to take care of, and you have to help them on their journey of self-identification and self-realization to recognize that, yeah, graduate school isn't quite where they ought to be. Then after that, there's a section on just undergraduate teaching and how to do that well, in which I freely admit that there are many books that are much better and much more complete on the subject. My teaching philosophy has always been mostly that trying to be engaging and dynamic, and being there is enough that you can overcome many of the imperfections of pedagogy and practice. And then there's a section about professional communities, about the editorial world and about reviewing and about peer review and how to be a good colleague through the peer review process. And then a chapter about professional communities. So it covers most of the things that we spend our days doing as academics, and hopefully provides some lessons from the lessons I've learned the hard way, for people who are starting out and are interested in academic career tracks. I come at it from the natural sciences side, but I think the book is targeted towards really academics much more broadly than that, because the human system issues are the same whether you're an English professor or a sociology professor or a biology professor. We just have more money than they do. And more pressure to bring in that money, so there's a cost and a benefit with that. So that's what the book is about.
Would anybody like to comment or have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure thing, Trish.
It sounds to me like your book can serve really usefully as a textual mentor.
Mm-hmm.
When person-to-person mentoring for new faculty is sometimes not formalized.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering just if you have any thoughts looking back on your career, other people's careers, if that kind of formalized mentoring is something that might be important, or is that something that really doesn't turn out to be?
I think it could be a good idea that when new faculty come in, they're trying to figure out the ropes and trying to figure out how to do all these things that are all new and all different. And usually you've only seen from the outside when you're in graduate school or even as a postdoc. So I know some departments assign a mentor to new faculty members, a senior faculty. EEMB actually does that. I don't think that system works very well. I think people need to find their own mentors. But at least by starting the process where there's some senior faculty who is assigned to kind of keep a little bit of an eye on a new faculty member and to be there for them is a healthy thing. And then you find your own sources of advice and mentorship. But you know, it is a complex world, and universities are very complex operations, and figuring out how it all works and how to do all these different things is not easy. And we often do it on our own, figuring it out by trial and error. And the better we can get away from relying on that, probably the better we would be. You know, universities have the same kind of rank structure as the military does. You know, assistant professors are like majors, associate professors are lieutenant colonels, and full professors are colonels. And then there are the lower ranks, and the amount of time you spend in each of those and the parallels between military rank structure and academic rank structure are surprisingly strong. The military has a very aggressive system of training people in how to actually do their jobs. And we just sort of say, okay, go figure it out on your own. And there are good reasons we each do it the way we do it, but there are probably some lessons that could be learned from another system where teaching people how to function within the system is actually an important thing to do.
Was there something that inspired you to write this book?
Yes, and the immediate start was recognizing I'd already written about a third of it in blog posts. But the blog posts came because I developed early on really a focus on the mentoring that Trish just mentioned, on helping my junior colleagues figure out how to do the things that we do as academics. So the first book about writing was about a skill that is sorely lacking among academics, and yet is the way we make our living. Is mostly what we do is write, and most of us do it pretty poorly. And partly I learned some of the lessons about how real writers think about writing, some of that from my wife Gwen and some of the sources she gave me, but to really think about what we do as writing And then it was a sort of a natural progression to go beyond just simply writing to other things that we do as academics. And that I thought that I could have a voice and could put something together that would have some wisdom and that would be useful to junior academics and that might be readable and that people might find useful. And Oxford University Press clearly agreed with me, so.
That's great.
Josh?
Oh yeah, hey Tess.
So with this book, it seems like it's a way for individual faculty to pick it up and teach themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there are suggestions that you have for departments or systems that could adopt some of this, and instead of relying on every individual young person to do it themselves.
I don't see departments doing much as an organized sense, just because new people come in so infrequently. UCSB does have some programs for new faculty that operate at a wider level. So there's a whole grant proposal writing summer program for new faculty. So universities, I think, could certainly expand those kinds of initiatives and pull in a whole cohort of new faculty and sort of give them a primer on how the university works, on things to think about, and who to go talk to for various things and how things actually happen. I think that would actually be a really healthy thing to do, to have a sort of a boot camp for new faculty, and mostly we don't. So the department staff sort of take every new faculty member and drag them through all the systems, but
Maybe a dean of faculty or centers of excellence for faculty.
yeah, I think it would actually be a good idea to create a summer boot camp for faculty that got hired that year.
So it creates a cohort between them also.
Exactly so.
Okay, thank you.
I may suggest that to the EVC.
I'm curious, do you think being a faculty has changed through time? Like the responsibilities and the expectations, not like specifically like, you know, the systems in which you get reimbursed, but just kind of like what being a faculty person has meant?
I think the core of the job has stayed constant for the last 500 years. And that is being a scholar and being a teacher. The ancillary systems, I think, have gotten harder. And the expectations of what we're supposed to do have gotten more intense. We're supposed to be more involved in our students' lives. We're not supposed to just be professors who get up in front of a class and pontificate and then, you know, walk away. It's our job to sort of monitor students to a greater degree. It's our job to be more involved in a whole array of activities. And where there used to be human support staff that sort of provided most of the support functions, most of those have now become online virtual systems where there's a fairly steep learning curve for all of them and not a whole lot of help. So like how to do things like get reimbursed for having a visiting colleague here. I can't even get Concur to talk to me yet. There's no human to talk to. It all goes through the systems. So I think that the Red Queen's race has gotten faster, is that there's a bit more running as fast as you can just to stay in one place. But the core job hasn't changed. You know, it used to be that when you got a manuscript to review, you were sent a hard copy and had 3 weeks to provide a review. Now places will start harassing you after about a week and a half saying, come on, you agreed to review this paper, get it back to us. And there's just a lot more coming through because there's just so much more scholarship being produced. And so much of it is just worthless junk but you still have to take the time to say no to the MDPI journals that are publishing this crap that comes out of the rest of the world that is the low-grade stuff. There's always nuggets of gems in all of the rest of this stuff, but Sturgeon's law is true that 90% of everything is crap. That there is a slice of really great scholarship that gets done that's really novel and that's really insightful, and there's a lot of just sort of mundane turning the crank kind of stuff. And that's a lot on the international side, at least in my fields. That most of the papers that are submitted now are from China. And most of those papers are, in China we have this problem. It's like, well then why aren't you submitting it to a Chinese journal? Because they need to play on the international scholarly playing field. But their systems aren't well gauged to support that. So there's great talent, but systems that are cranking out lots of people. Within the US, I think we do a really good job of producing high quality scholarship. Even then, all of us produce a fair bit of stuff that's relatively mundane, and then a small fraction of what we do that really is, super high quality. It's just the nature of it. Not every piece is a nature paper.
How much influence do you think new faculty members can have on the culture in a department? If they join and they're hoping that it might be more social, but it's not, what is,
I think
do you think they just have to fit in, or?
It depends. So for example, in EEMB we've had a lot of hiring over about the last 5 or 6 years, and there's a whole cohort of young faculty that have definitely formed a cohort, and that has somewhat changed the culture of the entire department, I would say, and certainly has produced this cadre of interactive energy that's really great. But if you get hired into a department where they're not hiring a lot of new people, it means you're the one new assistant professor, and among a population of associate and full professors, there's much less opportunity to have a real impact. So I think it can vary a lot. And graduate students and postdocs can sort of influence the culture of a department too, just by sort of bottom-up pressures on things.
One more question?
Iris.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you figure out what success looks like in this environment. And I don't necessarily mean like tenure or a grant or the very concrete examples, but I'm sure you've seen many different careers and trajectories and people with very different levels of satisfaction or fulfillment in that faculty career trajectory.
Yeah, that's a good and challenging question. And for those of you who don't know, Iris is one of our new faculty who's just starting off trying to figure out how things work. I think we each have our own personal agendas and goals and aspirations. So success will be measured in two ways. One, it will be measured by the formal structures of the university, and that is tenure. And there's a very clean and very clear process for that. But most of the people we hire, at least at UCSB, really reach beyond that bar. In the entire history of my department, since we had a divorce as a biology department and formed two separate departments, at least since that divorce, we've never denied tenure to anybody. So tenure may seem like this huge hurdle bar, but it hasn't actually functioned that way, because most people we hire are good and they do well. And so for most of us, success is actually a bar higher than the university sets, but it's still based on personal goals and aspirations. Are your students happy with your classes? Are they doing well? Do you feel like they're catching on to what you're giving them? Are they engaging with that? Are they coming to you for opportunities and what's next after this class? You know, those are the kinds of questions that I think you would probably be more asking yourself as a metric for, are you succeeding? And we'll look at the same kinds of metrics, really, of are your students happy with you, when we do the official processes as well. But I hope you'll do way better than just the minimum that we require.
too.
Yeah, I have confidence, or you wouldn't be here otherwise.
Dr. Joshua Schimel, thank you very much for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.